I think United winning the treble in 98-99 is a much bigger achievement than if City or Liverpool won it now, simply because it was harder then. Like United wouldn't, like if you look at the league tables, like United's points total, even when they were brilliant under Ferguson, they weren't getting up into the 90s. They weren't hitting towards 100 points. Like statistically, they were closer to their rivals than City or Liverpool are now. Because of how football's changed, City and Liverpool are so much better than the other teams in the Premier League, and they've got so much more behind them in terms of like sports science and physical preparation and everything else. And so, and if City or Liverpool did it now, it would be a big achievement. So to go back to 98-99, where there was much less stratification involved, I think it just means that there was a much higher degree of difficulty for United to do it. And while like anyone who doesn't support United, sometimes you can roll your eyes a little bit when United fans talk about the 98-99 treble season over and over again, Andy. But it seems to me like the further away we get from it down the line, it does actually grow in stature as an incredible footballing achievement, which even if it's repeated, which I think is unlikely, it won't be kind of knocked off its perch.
I think it was, and you need luck, you need everything to come together, and it just happened for Manchester United. I remember my City fans mates that season who were going to all of those games in the third tier, and they still supported their team. They didn't make them any worse as people. They supported Manchester City and they followed them everywhere. And we'd chide them, we'd wind them up and say, "You're going to Gillingham and we're going to Turin." And I think sometimes people forget that for the majority of football fans, their team doesn't win trophies. This is just normal. Very few teams can win trophies, and I don't remember my City mates that season being particularly bitter. They just followed their team, and I actually respected them as fans who followed their team. And we'd say, you don't need a passport. I'm sure they were slightly jealous when we were going to these more exotic locations, and how the tables have absolutely turned. With Manchester United, the treble was brilliant, but as with Liverpool, there's a lot of success that fans can dip into historically. United reached 3 European Cup finals in 4 years. I think that's often overlooked. Around 08, 09, 10, 11, and then the decline setting after that, combined with the rise of City. I think United, I remember in the 90s, this phrase ABU, anyone but United. Ferguson intentionally created a siege mentality. He didn't want people to like them, and the players fed off that. Maybe there was a begrudging respect that a lot of those players actually came through the youth system, that they didn't like them, but you'd want them in your team, if that makes sense. You didn't like a snarling Roy Keane, but you'd want him in your team because he was such a good player. And just talking about it all depresses me a little bit, because so many things were down to one person, Ferguson, and so many things were done right. And this perfect storm was created where United commercially took advantage in a way that Liverpool hadn't done. So when Liverpool was successful in the 80s, the climate was very different. Football crowds were much lower. Attendance is now at an all-time high. But Old Trafford expanded, and they really sort of combined, taking advantage of the Sky money, the internationalism, bringing players in from abroad. So it was a perfect storm in some ways for Manchester United as Liverpool floundered. But it was a very, very good team, and they had strength in all positions. They had 4 strikers, 2 of the reserve strikers, not reserve that, but Solskjaer and Sheringham were not in the idealised starting 11 for most Manchester United fans that season. They ended up having the biggest say of all. There's definitely a sense of the collective and of sharing the success, where players were absolutely driven and devastated if they weren't selected, like Nicky Butt in the FA Cup final. But equally, he was devastated that 2 of his close mates were suspended and couldn't play in the final. I think that team spirit really was genuine. And as I talk about it, I just think there's one of the qualities which is lacking at Manchester United now, as well as the commercial preeminence. It's completely gone. Long gone are the days where United could go to a club like Tottenham and take a Berbatov or a Carrick. the financial hegemony which Manchester United had, that has gone, and that's definitely another factor. Partly because of the way City are funded and Chelsea are funded as well, and partly because good footballing decisions have been made by clubs like Liverpool.
Just one thing you said there, Andy, I thought was quite interesting, which does relate to Liverpool and City as well. This season, I mean, I know this will probably make both of you want to run an absolute mile if Liverpool won the quadruple. There's a reason why nobody's done that before, as Jurgen Klopp did say the other day. But I think that what gives Liverpool a chance of winning certainly maybe one or two other trophies this season is what you just mentioned there about United. You know, the options that United had in '99 up front. You know, 4 absolute top strikers, each of them offering something slightly different. As you said, you know, Sheringham and Solskjaer weren't the main 2 that season. They won the Champions League for United. So I think Liverpool this season, which is one thing that one advantage that they have over City, maybe you might see it a bit differently, Jack, but you know, the number of options that they've got in attack this season, you know, arguably, you know, six players that can play in the front 3 positions who are all doing quite well at the moment. You know, for all of the form is quite good. You could maybe extend that number to 7 or 8 if you want to include Harvey Elliott and Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain. They have played up front this season. I just think at certain points in the season, it's going to be really interesting from here in to see how Klopp manages that, because I think if Liverpool are to go and win more than what they've won already this season, that needs to be managed quite carefully, not just in terms of the time, but the emotional element to it. When Salah came off at the weekend and Klopp gave him 10 minutes rest, he wasn't happy. So these are players who are used to be playing every minute of every game, Mane included. So I do think that's where Liverpool might have a little bit of an advantage over City. I don't know, you might see it differently. I know obviously Guardiola's sort of found some solutions to the accusations that they don't have they don't have enough forwards or an established centre forward, and obviously it's been very convincing. But I just think that firepower, you know, come the end of the season, always, for me, particularly if you're trying to win more than just one trophy, it does have a big impact potentially. And obviously that leads us to the City game in April at the Etihad. I mean, I personally feel that the games between Liverpool and City have been the difference, you know, when the 2 teams have been head to head over the last couple of years. I thought City should have won at Anfield. Liverpool were lucky that day that Mo Salah turned up because he didn't play very well. City should have won that day, but they still got a point. Liverpool could have won still, but I think that game at the Etihad in April could end. I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm sort of bigging it up like Sky, but I think it could prove to be decisive come the end of the season, because the margins are so small. And when City won the league in 2019, people talk about the points where Liverpool lost that title. For me, you know, it was a match-winning goal by Sane at the Etihad.
Yeah.
In one of the great games. I mean, for me, it was one of the best Premier League games I've ever seen in terms of the quality of both teams. And on that day, Sane scores, and I think Mane's shot hits the post and rolls across the line. Very, very tight decisions, and that ultimately defined the whole season. So I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case again in April.
Yeah, and I wonder if they might meet again in Europe. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, that game in 2018 where Liverpool really destroyed City in that first leg was a great tie in itself. And then even the second, I mean, it's kind of forgotten by history a bit because Liverpool nicked it, but for the first half of the second leg, City was sensational. Yeah. City was so good. And obviously that was 4 years ago now. And given that City and Liverpool are, you know, they clearly are the 2 best teams in Europe and have been for a while, you'd have to expect that the chances are they will meet again in the Champions League this year. I mean, they could, even in 2019, they could have met. I mean, if Raheem Sterling's winner against Tottenham hadn't been VAR'd, then City would have got through to the semis. I'm sure they would have beaten Ajax over 2 legs. Then we could have had a City-Liverpool Champions League final. So I feel like this era of City versus City and Liverpool rivalry dominance is kind of inevitably heading towards a big Champions League final at some point. Maybe it would have to be this year or next year, while Guardiola and Klopp are still there. to kind of settle it once and for all.
What a thrilling prospect it is listening to you two talking
Yeah.
about this. I got sent to Madrid in 2019 to cover the game for work, and I'm just like shaking my head all day long. And then this man came out of a subway station selling, I think he was selling sunglasses, wearing like a snide Man United shirt. And I thought, you've just made my day, mate. You've got no idea of what's coming to you today. I think City Liverpool now, from a football perspective, is clearly the preeminent rivalry. I remember speaking to Keane about rivalries, 2003-04, and me saying to him, City or Liverpool? He's like, none of them. It's Arsenal. We're the players. We see things totally different to you fans. And I found that quite interesting.
There's the conversation about United knocking Liverpool off the perch, which I'm sure Jamie Carragher's told Andy this as well, but he's adamant that did not happen. It's just a rewrite of history, because by the time United won the Premier League title, they were competing with Norwich. I think it was Norwich and Villa. Liverpool had vacated that position that they'd held for so long, and it's to some degree, sort of a bit of self-harm there with the Graham Souness era. But there's no doubt, that United took that position. I mean, I was quite a young person at that time. I mean, I think a lot of people see Liverpool fans, sort of the wider global fan base, as the sort of see the glory elements of it. But I grew up in a period where Liverpool were miles away from being where they are now. And I mean, I hated watching Man United on TV every midweek. It felt like every week, midweek in Europe in big Champions League games. I know it took them a while to get there to win the Champions League, but even before that, I mean, I must have watched far too many Man United games as a kid, just because that was the only football on TV at the time. And it was easy to understand why so many people sort of grew in to become Manchester United fans around the country, because they were there all the time, in the same way that Liverpool had been in the 80s when football matches that first started being televised regularly on TV. So all I can say is that in '99, when United did the treble, Liverpool felt like a long way away from Liverpool being where they wanted to be. As Andy touched on earlier, let's not forget, 2 years later, Liverpool won the treble of their own, which isn't the treble, but a treble.
We had a big flag of that Mickey Mouse treble.
Hey, it provided some of my best memories, as watching Liverpool, and I'm sure I listen to United fans talking about some of the, like winning the Cup Winners' Cup and stuff like that earlier on, like that sort of, that meant something at the time, because Liverpool had been so far away from where they wanted to be, and it felt to me that they were a serious European football team and club again, and to get them back onto that sort of, into that conversation. So, for United, I don't know whether it sounded earlier that I was saying that it's going to take them a long time. It does feel like it could take them a long time, but a lot needs to go right very quickly to get them back in a position where that they're competing and there is, it might sound cruel saying this, but a serious football team who are going to cause you problems, and you're going to be in a match. I thought yesterday when I watched the game against City, it just summed everything up the way it is at United at the moment. So, yeah, I mean, it was the 90s were not a fun time being a Liverpool fan. I just always felt that there was something missing, and that United were a serious football team, a serious football club with serious players who were just better than Liverpool, really. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how that changes at United, because I think that the challenge for United is slightly different to Liverpool.